All right, Ray Epps. Just for the audience that's not familiar with that name, tell us why he's interesting.
He's interesting because he was caught on video numerous times encouraging people to go into the Capitol that day. So he was basically the night before and the day of telling people go inside the Capitol building, directing people to the building. He was on an area that was allegedly restricted access. Yet he has not been charged with any crime. And no one at DOJ or FBI can explain why. There are suspicions that he was working for the FBI or for some other government agency. The January 6th committee came out and said that they interviewed him. He's not with law enforcement, was never an informant. And then came back 2 weeks later and said, oh, by the way, we're going to formally interview him. So it just supports suspicions that I believe are true, is that he has, that there were hundreds, if not thousands, of provocateurs or people acting on behalf of various government agencies to provoke a lot of the confrontations and violence we saw that day.
So there's no evidence of it yet. We're curious. I'm looking at their statement. They say, the House committee says, the Select Committee is aware of unsupported claims that Ray Epps was an FBI informant, based on the fact that he was on the FBI wanted list and then he was removed from that list without being charged. Then it goes on to say, the Select Committee has interviewed Mr. Epps. Mr. Epps informed us that he was not employed by, working with, or acting at the direction of law enforcement on January 5 or 6 or at any other time, and that he's never been an informant for the FBI or any other law enforcement agent. He informed us. That doesn't really answer the question. That Mr. Epps said that to the committee. Mr. Epps may have said a lot of things to the committee. I would really like to know. And was it Ted Cruz ask an FBI spokesperson about this and say, was Ray Epps working for the FBI? Now, she seemed to deny it, but we haven't closed this circle entirely.
Well, two things. Representative Tom Massey confronted Attorney General Merrick Garland a few months ago in a hearing and played the recordings of Ray Epps, encouraging people to go on the Capitol. Merrick Garland had no idea who he was talking about or who Ray Epps was. But then in a separate, what you're referring to, Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, Ted Cruz and Tom Cotton confronted Jill Sanborn, who was a top counterterrorism official at the FBI. Ted Cruz asked her twice if there were any FBI agents or informants who either engaged in or incited violence on January 6th. Megyn, she refused to answer the question.
Yeah. She said, I can't answer that.
We know there were hundreds. That's right. We know there were hundreds, if not thousands, of undercover FBI agents. We know this because DOJ officials, and now has been reported in Newsweek, a bombshell article earlier this month that said hundreds of elite FBI forces, agents were deployed to the Capitol that day and later that afternoon. Megyn, I've watched as much video of January 6th as anyone, photographs. I've never seen anyone identified as an FBI officer walking around trying to, do his job or prevent violence or move the crowd away. None of that. So who were they? What were they doing? So there's plenty of reason, justification to suspect that the FBI and other government agencies were deeply involved, not just in what happened that day, but in planning for it ahead of time, which I do talk about in my book.
Well, it's relevant. It's relevant. It's not to say that they caused everything that day, but if they had a hand in it, if they encouraged people, so it'll certainly be relevant to the criminal defenses that these men assert while on trial. We're seeing that in the Governor Whitmer case right now, right? There was this plot to kidnap the governor, and it was horrible, and she came out and said it's horrible. Then it turns out that something like half of the guys involved were FBI agents who were stirring it up and encouraging it and saying, is everybody on board? We're going to kidnap her. Okay, here we go. And the defense is going to be entrapment. We were entrapped by the FBI. They were the ringleaders. They lured us into it. That could work. Might not, but it could. Okay, let's talk about Stuart Rhodes, who's the leader of the Oath Keepers. Who's Stuart Rhodes? Who are the Oath Keepers, and why are they relevant?
So Stuart Rhodes is the founder of the Oath Keepers. He founded it in 2009. It is allegedly a violent armed militia group filled with white supremacists. That's what we've been told. And so the Oath Keepers were involved in the Capitol protest. One group, Megyn, walked into the Capitol building in a stack formation. They stayed inside for 20 minutes. They didn't break any windows, destroy any property. They brought no weapons, which is weird for a militia group, didn't attack anyone, walked out. Another group of 2 or 3 men walked into the Capitol, had a confrontation with police. I'm told a cop hit one of them. He punched back. They left 5 minutes later. No weapons. They had no orchestrated plan to overthrow the government, as we've been told. But they started rounding up and arresting people within 2 weeks of the January 6th protest, including elderly disabled veterans they were dragging off to secret prisons. But oddly, person one, Stuart Rhodes, who was person one in all of the conspiracy indictments, hadn't been charged. And so some of us started raising this issue. Darren Beatty at Revolver.News, who's done extensive detailed investigative work into January 6th, really started saying, well, if he's person one, he's responsible for this conspiratorial attack on the Capitol. Why is he still a free man? So lo and behold, January 12th, there is the grand jury indictment against Stuart Rhodes and 10 other Oath Keepers, all of whom had already been charged for seditious conspiracy.
And this is the first time we saw, yes, because up till then we hadn't seen, well, we still haven't seen insurrection charged of anybody, right? And that's a crime you can charge. It hasn't happened. But this is the closest thing we've seen to sedition. Seditious conspiracy is something Andy McCarthy said he charged the blind sheikh with back when that guy orchestrated the first bombing of the World Trade Center. So this is the first time we saw that appear in criminal charges against anybody connected with January 6th, when they charged the 11 Oath Keeper guys with that.
That's right. That's the first. Okay. There are other conspiracy charges, including the Oath Keepers. The original indictments were for conspiracy, but this is seditious conspiracy. They are accusing these men of using force to overthrow the government, which is just preposterous, Megyn. How do you overthrow the government with, khaki pants and a military helmet and no weapons and go in and take selfies and leave? So this is just more optics, more fabricated drama out of this Justice Department. And the trials are set. The first trial is set for April. And then the next trial will be in July. So they're also trying to produce these show trials during the election.
Do we think it answers the question about Stuart Rhodes, right? It doesn't sound like he's an FBI informant if he's been charged with seditious conspiracy.
It doesn't, but there's still a lot of unanswered questions about him. Now, he will be detained in Texas. So far, I don't know if he'll be moved to the DC jail as others have been. But look, no, he's not going to be convicted of seditious conspiracy. As you know, I mean, the last time anyone in government tried that was in 2010 in Michigan, and the judge threw out the case. It's very difficult to prove. And so we'll see as they put the evidence together exactly what Stuart Rhodes did, because he definitely was the ringleader. He was cultivating these people, visiting them at their places of business when some of them were holding anti-lockdown rallies. And so he definitely did cultivate a lot of these people. So when you read the documents, you consider that someone who allegedly who is so dangerous has been a free man for a year. There are just things that don't add up. And to your point, Megyn, the backdrop of the Whitmer kidnapping case should raise a lot of more suspicions about government involvement in January 6th, because those two events not only are tied together timeline-wise, but also by the government themselves. They continue to show, look at these dangerous militia people. They were the same ones who were involved in January 6th. And so those two events are tied together. It's almost impossible to think that there weren't operatives like Ray Epps, possibly someone like Stuart Rhodes, considering what exactly did he do? Why did the government wait so long to indict him? But there's so many games out of this DOJ and FBI. Your guess is as good as mine as to what Stuart Rhodes did or could have trial. Done.
Yeah, well, Stuart Rhodes, I mean, you've pointed this out. Our audience should know you're not afraid of the facts that make these guys look bad. Stuart had bad messages. They've managed to get, I think it's interesting, they apparently got his Signal group chat. That's another one of those messaging apps that they tell you is totally stealthy and nobody could ever find your chat on it, that and WhatsApp, right? They can find your chats on all this stuff.
For sure.
So this is from an article that you wrote in American Greatness. His communications, you read, were by far the most inflammatory. On November 5, 2020, in a Signal group chat he initiated, Rhodes warned of a civil war and encouraged the participants to, quote, prepare mind, body, spirit. In a December 2020 interview, Rhodes declared, quote, we will have to do a bloody, massively bloody revolution against them if Biden assumed the presidency. And then at 1:30 p.m. on January 6th, he predicted the day would lead to, quote, our Lexington, and on from there. So, I mean, you would agree, though, if this guy's not an FBI agent, I would say it certainly looks like he's not now that he's been arrested. It's not so good for the Oath Keepers. They do look like they were organized in planning something quite nefarious.
Well, they were, and here's the difference. But again, the question is, they've had all those communications since the very beginning. And they have Stuart Rhodes on numerous podcasts and interviews saying basically the same thing. They knew he was person one in every indictment. If they had all of that information, why did they wait over a year for perhaps, let's just say it's legit, the most dangerous man involved in the Oath Keepers, not a disabled veteran like Thomas Caldwell, or not some of these other people who are charged with nonviolent crimes who've been rotting in this DC jail for almost a year?